The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in September of 1883, and Penelope Nash knew before she even opened it that her life in Boston was about to change forever. Though she had no idea that the man waiting for her 2,000 miles away would prove to be nothing like the educated gentleman who had written those carefully penned words, promising her a refined life in the Arizona Territory. She sat in the cramped boarding house room she shared with two other women, both seamstresses who worked 16-hour days for barely enough to survive, and read the advertisement response for the third time. Mr. Harold Pemberton, a successful merchant in Superior, Arizona, sought a wife of good breeding and education to help him manage his growing business interests and provide cultured companionship in what he described as a surprisingly civilized mining town nestled in the mountains. The photograph he included showed a thin man with spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard, standing beside what appeared to be a well-appointed storefront. Penelope folded the letter carefully and looked around the dingy room that had been her home for the past year, ever since her father's death had left her penniless. Her mother had died when she was 12, and her father, a professor of literature at Harvard, had spent his final years educating his only child with the same rigor he applied to his university students. By the time Penelope was 22, she could read Greek and Latin, discuss philosophy and science, and debate politics with anyone who dared engage her. These accomplishments had made her father proud, but had also rendered her unmarriageable in Boston society, where men wanted wives who could manage households and produce children, not discuss Aristotle over breakfast. 3 weeks later, Penelope stepped off the stagecoach in Superior, Arizona, her traveling suit covered in dust despite her best efforts to stay clean during the arduous journey. The town sprawled across a canyon, with the Silver King mine dominating the landscape and smaller buildings clustered along narrow streets that climbed the hillsides. Mountains rose in every direction, their slopes dotted with saguaro cacti and scrub brush that looked nothing like the manicured parks of Boston. Mr. Pemberton was waiting at the stage depot, and Penelope's heart sank the moment she saw him. The photograph had been generous, or perhaps very old, because the man before her was at least 60 years old, with watery eyes and a permanent frown that suggested chronic dissatisfaction with the world. "Miss Nash," he said, looking her up and down with an expression that mirrored her own disappointment. "You're rather tall, aren't you? And those spectacles make you look quite severe." Penelope straightened her spine, bringing herself to her full height of 5 feet 8 inches. "Mr. Pemberton, your photograph appears to have been taken some years ago." His frown deepened. "A woman should not be impertinent. I hope this is not a sign of the modern attitudes I have heard plague Eastern women." The next 3 days were a special kind of torment. Mr. Pemberton installed Penelope in his home, a surprisingly large house near the center of town, but kept her at arm's length while he conducted what he called an evaluation period. He quizzed her on domestic skills and seemed dismayed by every answer. Could she make preserves? She had read about the process but never actually done it. Could she manage servants? There had been no money for servants after her father lost his position. Did she play the piano? Yes, but she preferred to spend her time reading. "Reading," Mr. Pemberton said with clear disdain on the third evening, after Penelope had mentioned she had brought 3 trunks of books with her. "I had hoped for an educated woman, but you seem to have confused education with unwomanly intellectual pursuits." "A wife should be accomplished, Miss Nash, not a bluestocking who fills her head with ideas above her station." "My station?" Penelope set down her teacup with enough force to make it rattle. "You advertised for an educated bride, sir." I assumed you meant someone capable of intelligent conversation and perhaps assistance with your business affairs, as you mentioned in your letters. I meant someone who could read and write well enough to help with correspondence and keep proper accounts. Not someone who quotes Chaucer at the dinner table or has opinions on women's suffrage. He stood, his face flushed. This arrangement is not suitable. I will pay for your passage back to Boston, but I cannot marry a woman who would embarrass me in front of my associates with her excessive learning. Penelope wanted to argue, but the expression on his face told her it would be pointless. She had crossed an entire continent to be rejected for being exactly what he had claimed to want. The irony was bitter enough to choke on. The next morning, she found herself once again at the stage depot, this time waiting for the eastbound coach with considerably less hope than she had arrived with. Mr. Pemberton had given her enough money for passage and $5 extra, which he seemed to think was generous. Penelope sat on her largest trunk and tried not to cry. She had no home in Boston, no prospects, and no desire to return to the boarding house where women sold their youth and health for pennies. "Excuse me, miss, but you look like you might be in some trouble." Penelope looked up to find a young man standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that fell past his collar. His clothes were work-worn but clean denim trousers and a faded blue shirt, with a bandana tied around his neck. He looked to be in his mid-20s, perhaps a year or two older than she was, and his gray eyes held genuine concern. "I am quite well, thank you," Penelope said automatically, though her voice wavered on the last word. "Begging your pardon, but you don't look well. You look like someone who just had their world knocked sideways." He took a step closer, and Penelope noticed he moved with an easy grace that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin in a way she had never been. "I'm Isaac Zimmerman. I work the Z-Bar Ranch about 10 miles north of here. And before you tell me it's none of my business, I should mention that I saw you arrive a few days ago, and I heard around town that Harold Pemberton sent you packing." Heat flooded Penelope's cheeks. "The entire town knows. It's a small place, miss. Word travels fast, especially when someone like Pemberton makes a fool of himself." Isaac sat down on the trunk beside her, uninvited but somehow not unwelcome. "He's been through 4 mail-order brides in 2 years, sends them all back for one reason or another. Last one was too pretty, and he was afraid other men would look at her. One before that was too plain. You would think he would figure out the problem is him, not them." Despite herself, Penelope felt a small smile tug at her lips. "He said I was too educated. Too educated." Isaac shook his head in disbelief. "That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard, and I once watched a man try to lasso a mountain lion, so that is saying something." The smile became a genuine laugh, brief but real. "I read Greek and Latin. I can discuss philosophy and literature. Apparently these things make me unsuitable as a wife." Isaac was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he turned to look at her directly, and the intensity in his gray eyes made Penelope's breath catch. "Can you teach someone who never had the chance to learn those things? Someone who can barely read and write, who spent his childhood working cattle instead of sitting in a schoolroom?" Penelope blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I suppose I could. I helped my father with his students sometimes, when he needed assistance with the younger ones." "Then I have a proposition for you, Miss Nash, if you are willing to hear it." Isaac leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and spoke quickly, as if afraid she would interrupt before he finished. "The Z-Bar Ranch needs a schoolteacher. The foreman's wife has been teaching the children of the ranch hands, but she just had twins and cannot manage it anymore. There are 8 children who need schooling, and I need it too. I have been working since I was 10 years old, and I can read enough to get by, but I want more than that. I want to read books and understand things beyond cattle and horses. The job pays $30 a month plus room and board in the ranch house. It is not much, but it is honest work, and no one will tell you that you are too educated. Penelope stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. A job, independence, a place where her knowledge would be valued rather than scorned. It seemed too good to be true. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Because I know what it is like to be told you do not fit where you are supposed to fit, Isaac said quietly. My parents died when I was young, and I have been making my own way ever since. I worked my way up from stable hand to foreman of the Z bar, and I did it because I was willing to work harder than anyone else. But I also know that there is a whole world of knowledge out there that I have never had access to, and you have it. That seems like something worth taking a chance on. The stagecoach pulled up before Penelope could respond, and the driver called out for passengers heading east. Penelope looked at the coach, then at Isaac, then at her trunks full of books. She thought about returning to Boston with nothing, about finding another position as a governess or companion where her education would be tolerated at best. Then she thought about a ranch in the mountains where children needed teaching, and a young foreman wanted to learn everything she could teach him. I will need to bring my books, she said. Isaac's face broke into a grin that transformed him from handsome to absolutely devastating. We will bring every single one of them. I will rent a wagon right now. 2 hours later, Penelope found herself riding beside Isaac in a hired wagon, her 3 trunks secured in the back, as they climbed a winding road out of Superior. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, all rocky hills and unexpected valleys where cottonwood trees clustered near water sources. Isaac kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the Z Bar Ranch. The ranch has been here for 15 years, he explained as they followed a dry creek bed north. Started by a man named Zachary Barrett, which is where the Z Bar name comes from. He died 5 years ago and left it to his daughter, Miss Caroline Barrett. She is only 28, but she runs the whole operation herself. Some of the old-timers did not like taking orders from a woman at first, but she proved she knew what she was doing, and now the ranch is more profitable than it ever was under her father. And she is amenable to hiring me as a teacher, Penelope asked. She is the one who told me to find someone when I was in town today, Isaac said. She has been asking around for weeks, but there are not exactly a lot of qualified teachers wandering around the Arizona territory. When I saw you sitting at that depot looking like your heart was broken, something told me to talk to you. They reached the ranch as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. The Z Bar sprawled across a valley that had clearly been chosen for its reliable water supply, with a good-sized creek running through the property, and several springs feeding into holding ponds. The main house was a sprawling adobe structure with a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Outbuildings included a large barn, several bunkhouses, a cookhouse, corrals, and what looked like a small schoolhouse that had seen better days. Caroline Barrett came out to meet them, and Penelope was immediately struck by the woman's presence. She was tall and solidly built, with sun-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical braid and eyes the color of strong coffee. She wore men's trousers and a work shirt, and there was a confidence in her bearing that suggested she had never questioned her right to be exactly who she was. "So you are the educated bride that Harold Pemberton was too stupid to appreciate," Caroline said, offering her hand for a firm shake rather than a delicate greeting. "Isaac says you can teach Greek and Latin as well as the regular subjects. That seems almost too good to be true. I can also teach mathematics, literature, history, and science," Penelope said, deciding that this was not the time for false modesty. My father believed in comprehensive education. Good. Most of the children just need to learn their letters and numbers well enough to get by in the world, but there are a couple of bright ones who deserve more than that. And Isaac here has been pestering me for months about wanting to learn more than just reading and arithmetic. Caroline shot her foreman an amused look. He wants to be able to hold conversations in the fine salons of Boston, apparently. Isaac's ears turned red. I just want to understand the world better, Miss Barrett. That is all. Well, Miss Nash is going to help you with that. Caroline gestured toward the house. Let's get you settled. You will have a room to yourself in the main house, next to mine. Meals are in the cookhouse with everyone else, but you are welcome to use the parlor in the evenings if you need quiet space. School starts at 8 in the morning and runs until 1. Then you will have the afternoons to yourself. Isaac and the other men who want additional instruction can meet with you in the evenings if you are willing. Does that sound agreeable? It sounded like paradise. Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back quickly. It sounds perfect. The first week at the Z-Bar Ranch passed in a blur of activity. Penelope met the children she would be teaching, ranging in age from 6 to 14, and assessed their current skill levels. Most could read simple texts and manage basic arithmetic, but their education had been sporadic at best. She developed a curriculum that would bring them all up to a standard level while also providing advanced work for the 2 oldest girls, who showed real aptitude for learning. The small schoolhouse needed work, so Isaac and 2 other ranch hands spent 3 days repairing the roof, replacing broken windows, and building new desks. Penelope watched him work from the window of her room in the main house, noting the easy way he moved and the respect the other men showed him. He was clearly well-liked, the kind of leader who worked alongside his men rather than standing back and giving orders. On her 5th evening at the ranch, Isaac knocked on the door of the parlor where Penelope was preparing the next day's lessons. He had cleaned up from the day's work, his hair still damp from washing, and he carried a notebook and a pencil with the careful attention of someone handling precious items. I was hoping you might have time to start teaching me, he said, suddenly looking younger and more uncertain than she had seen him before. If you are too tired, I understand. I know you have been working hard getting the school ready. I'm not too tired, Penelope assured him, gesturing to the chair across from her. What would you like to start with? Isaac sat down and opened the notebook, revealing pages covered in laborious handwriting, some words crossed out and rewritten multiple times. I have been practicing my letters every night since I was 15, when the previous foreman told me I would never advance if I could not read and write properly. I can manage most things now, but I am slow, and I know my spelling is poor. I want to be better. I want to read real books, the kind you have in your trunks. There was such naked longing in his voice that Penelope felt her heart squeeze. She had spent so much of her life taking her education for granted, never considering how precious it might seem to someone who had been denied access to it. Then that is what we will work toward. But first, I need to understand where you are now so I know where to begin. For the next 2 hours, they worked together at the parlor table while the evening light faded and Caroline's housekeeper brought in lamps. Penelope had Isaac read aloud from a basic primer, then from a more advanced text, and finally from one of her father's old literature anthologies. His reading was halting but determined, and he clearly had a good mind for retaining information, even if the mechanics of reading were still challenging. You have taught yourself well, Penelope said when they finally stopped for the evening. Your foundation is solid. Now we just need to build on it. Isaac looked at her with an expression of such gratitude and hoped that Penelope felt warmth bloom in her chest. "Thank you, Miss Nash. This means more to me than I can properly express." "Then we will work on teaching you to express it," Penelope said with a smile. "That is what literature is for, after all, helping us find words for the things we feel." They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Penelope taught the children during the mornings, spent her afternoons preparing lessons and reading, and then worked with Isaac in the evenings. He proved to be a dedicated student, practicing his letters and reading whenever he had a spare moment. She saw him during breakfast in the cookhouse, with a book propped against his coffee cup. And Caroline mentioned that he had started carrying a small volume of poetry in his saddlebag. "I have never seen Isaac so focused on anything except ranch work," Caroline said one afternoon when she and Penelope were walking back from inspecting the schoolhouse. "You are working some kind of magic on him." "He is working magic on himself," Penelope corrected. "I am just providing the tools. His determination is his own. Still, I am glad you are here. You belong on the Z-bar, Miss Nash. I hope you are starting to feel that." Penelope was starting to feel it in ways that both comforted and frightened her. She was also starting to feel things about Isaac that had nothing to do with teaching and everything to do with the way her pulse quickened when he walked into the room, or how she found herself watching for him during the day, or how the evening lessons had become the part of her day she most looked forward to. It was dangerous, letting herself feel this way about him. He was her student, and she was here to teach, not to develop romantic attachments to handsome cowboys who wanted to learn Greek. Besides, Isaac had given no indication that he saw her as anything more than a teacher. He was unfailingly respectful, never presumptuous, and always proper in their interactions. Then came the night in early November when everything changed. They had been working on a poem by Keats, and Isaac had struggled through the dense language with growing frustration. Finally, he threw down his pencil and ran his hands through his hair, leaving it standing up in dark spikes that would have been comical if he had not looked so genuinely distressed. "I am never going to understand this," he said. "I can read the words, but I cannot make them mean anything in my head. They just sit there like a pile of rocks." Penelope set down her own book and looked at him carefully. "You are being too hard on yourself. Keats is difficult even for experienced readers. His imagery is complex, and his references are obscure if you are not familiar with classical mythology." "Then teach me classical mythology," Isaac said immediately. "Teach me everything you know, Penelope. I do not want to just read simple books and pretend that is enough. I want to understand all of it the way you do. I want to know what it feels like to read something beautiful and actually comprehend the beauty." He had never used her first name before, and hearing it in his voice sent a shiver through her. "That could take years, Isaac. There is so much to learn." "Then I will spend years learning it." He leaned forward, his gray eyes intense in the lamplight. "I spent my whole childhood thinking I was not smart enough for book learning, that I was only good for physical work. But these last 2 months with you have shown me that was a lie. I can learn. I just need the right teacher, and you are the right teacher, Penelope. You make everything make sense. You give me too much credit. You are the one doing the work. You are the one who makes me want to do the work." Isaac reached across the table and took her hand, and Penelope's breath caught at the contact. His hand was calloused from years of ranch work, warm and strong and steady. "You make me want to be better than I am. Smarter. More worthy of the knowledge you have to share. More worthy of you." Penelope's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "Isaac, I am just a teacher. You are so much more than that. You are brilliant and kind and patient, and you never make me feel stupid even when I struggle with something simple. You are beautiful, even though I do not think anyone has told you that enough, and you are brave, because you came out here alone and made a new life when the old one fell apart." He stood, still holding her hand, and pulled her gently to her feet. "I know I am just a cowboy who can barely read poetry, and you deserve someone who can discuss philosophy and quote Latin without stumbling over the words. But I am asking anyway, because I cannot keep pretending that these evenings are just about lessons. Penelope Nash, would you allow me to court you properly?" Penelope looked up at him. This man who had rescued her from despair at a stage depot and given her a place to belong, who worked harder than anyone she had ever met to improve himself, who wanted to learn everything she could teach him not because he thought it would make him superior, but because he genuinely loved learning. She thought about all the men in Boston who had dismissed her as too educated, too opinionated, too much of everything that made her who she was, and here was Isaac, asking her to teach him everything she knew and looking at her like she hung the moon. "Yes," she said simply. "I would like that very much." Isaac's smile was brilliant and relieved and hopeful all at once. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture that was both old-fashioned and utterly sincere. "I promise I will do this properly. I will speak to Miss Barrett tomorrow about my intentions, and we will observe all the proper courtship rules. But I need you to know that I am serious about this, about you, about us." "I know," Penelope said, and she did. She could see it in his eyes, feel it in the way he held her hand like she was something precious. "I believe you." They stood there in the lamplight, holding hands and grinning at each other like fools, until Caroline's housekeeper came in to bank the fire and gave them both knowing looks that made them step apart quickly. But Penelope went to bed that night with joy singing in her veins and the memory of Isaac's kiss on her hand lingering like a promise. True to his word, Isaac spoke with Caroline the next morning, and Penelope was summoned to the ranch office after her morning lessons ended. Caroline was sitting behind her father's old desk, looking amused and slightly exasperated. "Isaac tells me he wants to court you," Caroline said without preamble. "He was very formal about it, asked my permission since you are living in my house and under my protection, essentially. It was actually quite sweet, though I would never tell him that." Penelope felt her cheeks heat. "I hope you do not object." "Object? Penelope, I have been waiting for this since the day Isaac brought you here. The way that man looks at you when you are teaching, or when you are just walking across the yard, makes it very clear how he feels. I am just glad he finally worked up the courage to say something." Caroline leaned back in her chair. "Isaac is a good man. One of the best I have ever known, and I do not say that lightly. He is honest, hardworking, loyal, and he treats everyone on this ranch with respect regardless of their position. He will treat you well, Penelope. Better than Harold Pemberton ever would have." "I know," Penelope said softly. "He already has." Over the next few months, Isaac courted Penelope with a combination of Western practicality and surprising romance. He brought her wildflowers from the high meadows, taught her to ride horses, and took her on carefully chaperoned picnics to beautiful spots around the ranch. He continued his evening lessons with fierce determination, progressing from simple readers to more complex literature. By Christmas, he was able to read and discuss entire poems, and his writing had improved to the point where his letters to her were eloquent and moving. Because he did write her letters, even though they lived in the same house and saw each other every day. He would leave them on her breakfast plate or tucked into her books, short notes telling her he was thinking of her or longer missives discussing something he had read and wanted her opinion on. Penelope saved every single one, tying them with ribbon and keeping them in her trunk like the treasures they were. The children at the school adored seeing their teacher courted by the ranch foreman. The younger ones giggled whenever Isaac came to walk Penelope back to the main house after lessons, and the older girls sighed dramatically and declared it the most romantic thing they had ever witnessed. Penelope tried to maintain proper decorum, but it was difficult when Isaac would smile at her in that special way that made her forget there were other people around. In January of 1884, Isaac asked Penelope to take a walk with him after Sunday dinner. The winter air was cool but not cold, the Arizona sun providing enough warmth to make the afternoon pleasant. They walked along the creek that ran through the property, and Penelope noticed that Isaac seemed nervous, his usual easy confidence replaced by tension in his shoulders. "Is something wrong?" she asked, concerned. "No. Yes, not wrong exactly." Isaac stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Penelope, I have been thinking about this for weeks, and I have talked to Miss Barrett, and I have saved my wages, and I have practiced what I want to say. But now that the moment is here, all those practiced words have flown right out of my head." Penelope's heart began to race. "Isaac, I love you," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I love your mind and your kindness and your courage. I love the way you explain things and the patience you show when I struggle with a difficult concept. I love how you look in the morning with the sunlight in your hair, and I love how passionate you get when you talk about books. I love that you came all the way to Arizona to marry a man who did not deserve you, and you ended up here teaching me and the children instead. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life learning from you and loving you." He dropped to one knee right there beside the creek, still holding her hands, and Penelope felt tears spring to her eyes. "I do not have much to offer you. I have saved $300, and I have a small piece of land that Miss Barrett sold me last year that I have been planning to build a house on. I cannot give you a grand home in Boston or a life of leisure, but I can promise you that I will work hard every day to make you happy. I will honor your intelligence and encourage your teaching, and I will never, ever tell you that you are too educated or too anything. Will you marry me, Penelope Nash? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you?" Penelope pulled him to his feet and threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, Isaac Zimmerman, I will marry you. And you do not need to be worthy of me because you already are. You are everything I never knew I was looking for." Isaac lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her for the first time, a sweet, tender kiss that tasted of joy and promise and forever. They were married 6 weeks later in the parlor of the main house, with Caroline serving as witness and the entire ranch turning out for the celebration. Penelope wore a simple cream-colored dress that Caroline's housekeeper helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair that Isaac had picked that morning. Isaac wore new clothes bought specially for the occasion, and he looked so handsome and nervous and happy that Penelope felt her heart might burst from the fullness of it. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, the entire room erupted in cheers. The celebration lasted well into the night, with fiddle music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Penelope danced with Isaac until her feet hurt, and she met ranch hands and their wives and children who all seemed genuinely happy to welcome her into their community. Caroline pulled Penelope aside at one point during the evening, her eyes suspiciously bright. "I am so glad Isaac found you at that stage depot. You both deserve all the happiness in the world. Thank you for giving me a chance when you had no reason to trust me," Penelope said, hugging the other woman tightly. "You gave me more than a job. You gave me a home. You gave us something too," Caroline replied. You gave those children a real education, and you gave Isaac the tools to become the man he always wanted to be. That is worth more than you know. Isaac had been working on building their house for months, enlisting help from other ranch hands during their spare time. It was a modest structure but solidly built, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a parlor, and a study that Isaac insisted on including so Penelope would have space for her books and teaching materials. The house sat on a rise about a mile from the main ranch complex, close enough to be convenient but far enough to provide privacy. They spent their wedding night in that new house, alone for the first time since their courtship began. Isaac was nervous and tender and careful, treating Penelope like she was made of glass until she finally took his face in her hands and told him she would not break. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies with curiosity and care, and afterward, they lay tangled together in their marriage bed and talked until dawn about their hopes and dreams for the future. "I want to keep learning," Isaac said, his fingers tracing idle patterns on Penelope's shoulder. "I want to read all those books you brought with you, and I want to understand them well enough to discuss them with you properly. Do you think that is possible?" "I think you can do anything you set your mind to," Penelope replied. "You have already come so far from where you started. Your reading has improved tremendously, and your writing is quite good. We will keep working together, and you will achieve everything you want to achieve. What about you?" "What do you want?" Penelope thought about it carefully. 6 months ago, she had wanted to escape Boston and find some kind of security, even if it meant marrying a stranger. Now her wants had transformed into something deeper and more complex. "I want to keep teaching. I want to help those children learn and grow. I want to build a life with you here in this place that has become home. And someday, I want children of our own to teach and love." Isaac pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "That sounds perfect to me, all of it." Life settled into a rhythm that felt both productive and deeply satisfying. Penelope continued teaching at the ranch school, and her reputation as an excellent teacher spread to neighboring ranches. Soon, children from other properties were riding in for lessons, and Penelope found herself teaching a class of 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 16. Caroline insisted on paying her a higher salary to reflect the increased work, and Penelope was able to order new books and materials from back east. Isaac continued his own education with the same determination he brought to everything else. He read voraciously, working his way through Penelope's collection with increasing confidence. They spent their evenings reading together, sometimes aloud, sometimes in companionable silence, and then discussing what they had read. Isaac's insights often surprised Penelope, coming as they did from a perspective shaped by practical experience rather than academic theory. "I never thought about it that way," Penelope said one evening after Isaac had offered an interpretation of a Shakespeare play that cast the main character's actions in an entirely new light. "That is brilliant, Isaac. You see things in these texts that I miss because I am too focused on the traditional academic readings." Isaac looked pleased and slightly embarrassed by the praise. "I just think about what it would be like to actually live through these situations. Books are about people, right? And people act based on what they feel and what they have experienced. Sometimes the fancy literary analysis misses that." "You should write your own analysis," Penelope suggested. "You have a unique perspective that deserves to be shared." "Maybe someday," Isaac said, but he looked thoughtful, as if he were actually considering the possibility. In the spring of 1885, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. She told Isaac one evening after supper, simply taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. In October, I think." Isaac's eyes went wide, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to the main ranch house and lifted Penelope into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests that he needed to be careful now. "We are having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "A baby, Penelope. We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. Happy does not begin to cover it. I am terrified and thrilled and already planning how I am going to teach our child to read and ride and everything in between. He set her down carefully and knelt to press a kiss to her stomach. "Hello, little one. I am your father, and I promise I am going to do my best by you." Penelope ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed by love for this man who wanted to give their unborn child everything he had never had himself. "You are going to be a wonderful father." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the hot Arizona summer. Penelope continued teaching as long as she was able, finally taking a leave in September when she became too uncomfortable to stand for long periods. Caroline found a temporary teacher to take over the school, a young man from Tucson who was competent, if not particularly inspired. On October 15th, after a labor that lasted through the night and into the next day, Penelope gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James Isaac Zimmerman, and from the moment Isaac held his son for the first time, Penelope knew their family was complete. "He is perfect," Isaac whispered, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the tiny infant cradled in his arms. "Look at his fingers. Look at how small he is. We made this person, Penelope. We created this whole new human being." "We did," Penelope agreed, exhausted but happy beyond measure. "And we are going to raise him to be smart and kind, just like his father." The first year of James's life was a blur of sleepless nights and profound joy. Penelope had read books about child rearing, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of caring for an infant while also trying to maintain her teaching duties. She returned to the school part-time when James was 3 months old, bringing him with her in a basket that she set near her desk. The children were fascinated by the baby and took turns helping watch him, which freed Penelope to focus on her lessons. Isaac was a devoted father, taking on far more of the child care than most men of his era would consider appropriate. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with James during colicky nights, and talked to his son constantly, reading aloud from books even when James was far too young to understand the words. "I want him to hear language from the very beginning," Isaac explained when Penelope found him reading Dickens to their 4-month-old son. "I want him to grow up knowing that books are important and learning matters. I do not want him to ever feel like education is something out of his reach." "He is very lucky to have you as a father," Penelope said, settling beside them and resting her head on Isaac's shoulder. "We both are." When James was 18 months old, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was more difficult, with persistent nausea and exhaustion that made teaching challenging. Caroline suggested she take a full leave and let the temporary teacher handle the school permanently, but Penelope was reluctant to give up the work she loved. "You are not giving it up," Isaac pointed out gently. "You are just pausing it while you take care of yourself and our new baby. The school will still be there when you are ready to come back." In June of 1887, Penelope gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose. She had Isaac's gray eyes and Penelope's dark hair, and she came into the world screaming with a fury that suggested she would be a force to reckon with. "She has your spirit," Isaac said with admiration, watching his daughter nurse with determined focus. "Our Margaret is going to be a handful, I can tell already." He was right. Margaret proved to be a more demanding baby than James had been, strong-willed and opinionated even at a few months old. But she was also affectionate and curious, reaching for everything within her grasp and babbling constantly as if she had important things to say, and was frustrated by her inability to form words yet. James adored his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding times. He would sit beside Penelope while she nursed Margaret and read his baby sister stories from picture books, making up narratives based on the illustrations since he was still too young to read the actual words. Watching her children grow and learn filled Penelope with a sense of purpose and contentment she had never experienced before. This was what she was meant to do. She realized not just teach other people's children, but raise her own with the same love of learning that had shaped her entire life. And doing it alongside Isaac, who valued education as much as she did despite his different path to it, made everything feel complete. By 1888, Isaac had progressed to the point where he was reading and writing at a level equivalent to most college-educated men. He had worked his way through philosophy, science, history, and literature, and he could discuss complex ideas with confidence and insight. But more importantly, he had developed his own voice and his own ideas, shaped by his unique combination of practical experience and academic learning. One evening in early spring, Isaac presented Penelope with a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with his handwriting. "I wrote something," he said, looking nervous in a way he had not since their courtship days. "An essay, I suppose you would call it. About education and opportunity, and what it means to learn when you are not given access to traditional schooling. I would like you to read it and tell me what you think." Penelope took the journal and read the first page, then the second, then continued reading while Isaac watched anxiously. His writing was clear and powerful, blending personal narrative with broader observations about class, education, and the barriers that prevented people like him from accessing knowledge. It was raw and honest and absolutely compelling. "Isaac, this is remarkable," Penelope said when she finally looked up. "This is publishable. This is the kind of writing that could actually make a difference. You really think so? You are not just saying that because you are my wife. I am saying it because it is true. This essay challenges assumptions about who deserves education and why, and it does so from a perspective that most educated people never consider. You should submit it to magazines or journals." She flipped through the rest of the journal, seeing more essays on different topics. "You have written a whole collection here. These are all worth sharing." Isaac looked stunned and pleased and terrified all at once. "I would not know where to start. Then we will figure it out together, just like we figure out everything else." Over the next few months, they worked together to refine Isaac's essays and research potential publications. Penelope wrote letters to editors at various magazines and journals, using her father's old academic connections to get Isaac's work read by the right people. The rejections came first, as they always did. But then in the fall of 1888, a letter arrived accepting one of Isaac's essays for publication in a respected education journal. Isaac held the acceptance letter with shaking hands, reading it over and over as if he could not quite believe it was real. "They are going to publish my essay. They are going to pay me $50 for it. $50 for something I wrote." "This is just the beginning," Penelope said, hugging him tightly. "You have so much to say, and now people are going to listen." More acceptances followed. Isaac's unique perspective, a self-educated ranch foreman writing about education and opportunity, resonated with readers. His essays began appearing in journals and magazines, and he started receiving letters from other people who had taught themselves and been inspired by his story. The publication money was modest but meaningful, and Isaac put every penny toward buying more books and materials for the ranch school. In 1889, Penelope returned to teaching part-time, with Margaret now old enough to attend school alongside James. Both children were bright and curious, soaking up knowledge with the same enthusiasm their father had shown. James, at 4, was already reading simple books, and Margaret, at 2, knew her letters and numbers and could count to 20. Caroline, watching the Zimmerman family one Sunday afternoon during a ranch gathering, pulled Penelope aside with a smile. "You and Isaac have built something special here, not just a family but a whole community that values learning and growth. Half the hands on this ranch have asked Isaac to help them improve their reading and writing, and the children in your school are the best educated ranch kids in the territory. You should be proud." "I am," Penelope said, watching Isaac play with their children, tossing Margaret in the air while James hung on his leg demanding attention. "I never imagined my life would turn out this way, but I would not change a single thing about it." In 1891, Isaac's collected essays were published as a book titled Self-Made: Education and Opportunity in the American West. The publication was a modest success, selling mostly to teachers and people interested in education reform, but it established Isaac as a voice worth listening to. He was invited to speak at a teachers' conference in Phoenix, and Penelope went with him, bringing the children along so they could see their father share his ideas with a wider audience. Watching Isaac speak to a room full of educators, explaining his theories about experiential learning and the importance of meeting students where they were rather than expecting them to conform to arbitrary standards, Penelope felt pride swell in her chest. This was the man who had approached her at a stage depot 5 years ago and asked her to teach him everything she knew. He had taken that knowledge and built on it, creating something entirely his own. After the conference, as they lay together in the hotel room while the children slept in a connected room, Isaac pulled Penelope close and kissed her temple. "None of this would have happened without you. You gave me the tools to express ideas I did not even know I had. You changed my entire life, Penelope." "We changed each other's lives," Penelope corrected. "I was lost and angry when you found me, convinced that my education made me unsuitable for happiness. You showed me that the right person would value exactly the things others rejected me for. We built this life together, Isaac. Every good thing in it belongs to both of us. Then I am grateful for every single day we have had and every day still to come." They continued building their life at the Z-Bar Ranch, watching their children grow and teaching everyone who wanted to learn. James proved to have a gift for languages, picking up Spanish from the Mexican ranch hands, and showing interest in the Apache words Penelope taught from books about native languages. Margaret was more interested in science, constantly asking questions about why things worked the way they did, and conducting experiments with whatever materials she could find. In 1893, Penelope discovered she was pregnant with their third child, a surprise given that Margaret was now 6, and they had assumed their family was complete. The pregnancy was easier than her previous ones, perhaps because she was more experienced, and in March of 1894 she gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas after Penelope's father. Isaac was 41 now, with silver threading through his dark hair, and Penelope was 33. But they approached parenthood again with the same joy and wonder they had felt with their first child. Thomas was a calm, observant baby who seemed content to watch the world around him, and his older siblings doted on him constantly. Caroline, who had remained unmarried and devoted to running the Z-Bar, became an honorary aunt to the Zimmerman children. She taught them to ride and rope, and all the practical skills they would need to survive in the West, while Penelope and Isaac provided the academic education. The combination created well-rounded children who were equally comfortable in the saddle and the classroom. As the 19th century drew to a close, Penelope often reflected on how far she had come from that desperate day at the Superior Stage Depot. She had arrived in Arizona, expecting to marry a man who would tolerate her education at best, only to find herself rejected for the very qualities that made her who she was. But that rejection had led her to Isaac, who had not just tolerated her education, but had celebrated it, who had asked her to teach him everything she knew, and had built on that knowledge to create something remarkable. Their house had expanded over the years, with Isaac and the ranch hands adding rooms as the family grew. The study that had once held just Penelope's books now housed a library that served the entire ranch community, with Isaac's published works holding pride of place on a special shelf. The walls were covered with family photographs, the children's artwork, and maps showing all the places they hoped to visit someday. On their 10th wedding anniversary in February of 1894, Isaac surprised Penelope with a trip to Tucson, leaving the children with Caroline for a long weekend. They stayed in a proper hotel, ate in restaurants, and attended a lecture at the university. But the best moment came on their last evening when they walked through the desert at sunset, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked, holding her hand as they walked. "Giving up the possibility of a more sophisticated life. You could have gone back to Boston, found a position at a girls' school, or married someone with more education and status than me." Penelope stopped walking and turned to face him, cupping his weathered face in her hands. "I have never regretted a single moment of our life together. You gave me something no one else ever had. You valued me exactly as I am, without reservation or condition. You asked me to teach you everything I knew, but you taught me just as much in return. You taught me that intelligence comes in many forms, that book learning is only one kind of knowledge, and that the truest measure of a person is how they grow and what they do with the opportunities they are given. I love you, Isaac Zimmerman. I have loved you since the day you sat down beside me at that stage depot and told me Harold Pemberton was a fool." Isaac kissed her then, long and deep and full of all the emotion that 10 years of marriage had only intensified. "I love you too. Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy who could barely read and write. Thank you for taking a chance on a woman who was called too educated. We were both exactly what the other needed." They stood there in the desert as the sun set, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their individual disappointments. The Wild West was changing around them, becoming more civilized with each passing year, but their love remained as wild and fierce and true as the land itself. By 1900, James was 14, Margaret was 12, and Thomas was 6. The older children were both excelling in their studies, with James expressing interest in attending university, and Margaret determined to become a scientist, despite the barriers she would face as a woman in that field. Thomas was still young, but he showed signs of inheriting both his father's practical skills and his mother's love of learning. Isaac had published 2 more books, both successful in education circles, and he had become a sought-after speaker on topics related to education reform. He balanced these activities with his work as ranch foreman, never losing his connection to the land and the practical skills that had shaped him. Penelope continued teaching at the ranch school, which had expanded to accommodate 30 students from ranches throughout the region. She had trained several assistant teachers to help manage the growing enrollment, and the school had gained a reputation as one of the best in the territory. In 1901, Caroline Barrett surprised everyone by getting married herself to a widowed rancher from a neighboring property who had been courting her quietly for 2 years. She was 45 and he was 50, and their practical partnership suited them both. Caroline remained the owner and manager of the Z Bar, with her new husband bringing his smaller ranch under her management, effectively expanding their operation. "I never thought I would marry," Caroline confessed to Penelope the night before the wedding. "I was so focused on the ranch that I convinced myself I did not need anything else. But watching you and Isaac all these years showed me that the right partnership does not diminish you. It makes you stronger." "I am so happy for you," Penelope said sincerely. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Caroline. You gave me a chance when I had nowhere else to go. You will always be family to us." As the new century progressed, the Zimmerman family continued to thrive. James left for university in California in 1903, the first person from the Z Bar Ranch to pursue higher education. He wrote home regularly, describing his classes and the books he was reading, and Isaac read those letters with pride shining in his eyes. "Our son is at university," he said one evening, folding one of James's letters carefully. "A university, Penelope. That is because of you." "That is because of us," Penelope corrected. "We gave him opportunities and encouraged him to pursue them, but his success is his own." Margaret proved to be just as determined as her parents. When she finished her schooling at the ranch, she insisted on attending a women's college in the East, where she could study science properly. Isaac used the money from his book sales to pay her tuition, and in 1905, at 18, Margaret left for Massachusetts with her mother's books and her father's determination. Thomas, the youngest, proved to be the most like his father in temperament. He loved the ranch work and the practical skills that came with it, but he also loved learning, particularly history and literature. He announced at 10 that he wanted to be both a rancher and a teacher, seeing no reason why he could not combine both interests just as his parents had. In 1908, Isaac and Penelope celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Their children came home for the celebration, James bringing his new wife, a teacher he had met at university, and Margaret bringing stories of her graduate studies in chemistry. Thomas, now 14, helped organize a party at the ranch that drew friends and colleagues from across the territory. Caroline made a toast at the celebration, raising her glass to the couple who had become the heart of the Z Bar community. 25 years ago, Isaac brought home a mail-order bride who had been rejected for being too educated, and he asked her to teach him everything she knew. In doing so, they built a partnership that has enriched all our lives. They have taught us that education matters, that love requires respect and admiration, and that the best families are the ones we build through choice and commitment rather than obligation. To Isaac and Penelope Zimmerman, may the next 25 years be just as blessed as the first. Everyone drank to that, and Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. She looked around at the community that had become her family, at the children she and Isaac had raised, at the ranch that had given her a home when she had nowhere else to go. And she looked at Isaac, still handsome despite the gray in his hair and the lines around his eyes, who was looking at her with the same love and admiration he had shown from the very beginning. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked later that night when they were finally alone in their bedroom, the celebration over and the guests departed. "I am thinking about how far we have come," Penelope said, leaning against him. "About how I almost got on that stage coach back to Boston and gave up entirely. About how you saved me that day and every day since." "We saved each other," Isaac said, echoing what had become their truth over the years. You gave me education and purpose beyond ranch work. I gave you a place to belong and a man who would never tell you that you were too much of anything. We fit together, Penelope. We always have. We always will." They stood at the window of their bedroom, looking out over the ranch that had been their home for a quarter century. The Arizona landscape stretched out before them, harsh and beautiful and full of possibility, just as it had been on the day they met. The Wild West that had brought them together was fading into memory, replaced by the modern world with its railroads and telegraph lines and all the trappings of civilization. But their love remained as strong and true as ever, built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and the simple fact that they had each found in the other exactly what they needed. In 1910, James and his wife welcomed their first child, making Isaac and Penelope grandparents. The baby was a girl named Emma, and when Isaac held his granddaughter for the first time, Penelope saw tears stream down his face. "A grandchild," he whispered. "We have a grandchild, Penelope. We created a family, and now that family is growing beyond just us. This little girl will grow up with opportunities we fought to create, in a world that values education and knowledge. That is because of what we built together." "That is because of what love can build," Penelope said, watching her husband cradle their granddaughter with the same tenderness he had shown their own children. "That is what we have proven, Isaac. That two people who choose each other, who respect and value each other, can create something that lasts beyond themselves." Margaret earned her doctorate in chemistry in 1912, one of only a handful of women in the country to achieve that distinction. She came home to the ranch to share the news in person, her face glowing with pride and accomplishment. Isaac held her diploma as if it were made of gold, reading every word carefully. "Dr. Margaret Zimmerman," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My daughter, the doctor of chemistry. You did it, Margaret. You achieved something remarkable." "I did it because you and Mother taught me that I could do anything if I was willing to work for it," Margaret said, hugging her father tightly. "You never told me there were things girls could not do or should not want. You just encouraged me to pursue my interests and gave me the tools to succeed. That is the greatest gift any parent can give a child." Thomas graduated from the ranch school at 16 and announced that he wanted to attend the new Arizona State Teachers College while also working the ranch part-time. He had Isaac's gift for connecting with people and Penelope's love of teaching, and everyone who knew him agreed he would make an excellent educator. In 1915, Isaac published his final book, a memoir titled "Teach Me Everything: A Life of Learning and Love in the Arizona Territory." It was his most personal work, telling the story of his self-education and his relationship with Penelope, and it became unexpectedly popular, selling far more copies than any of his previous books. Readers wrote to him from across the country, sharing their own stories of finding love and education in unlikely places. One letter in particular moved Isaac deeply. It came from a young woman in Kansas who had been rejected by a prospective husband for being too interested in books. She had read Isaac's memoir and written to thank him for showing her that somewhere out there was a man who would value her intelligence rather than fear it. "I hope she finds her own version of you," Penelope said when Isaac showed her the letter. "Everyone deserves a partner who celebrates them rather than diminishing them." "She will find him," Isaac said confidently, "because we proved that those partnerships exist, and our story is giving other people hope. That might be the most important thing we have ever done." As they aged into their 50s and beyond, Isaac and Penelope became beloved figures not just on the Z-Bar Ranch but throughout the territory. They were invited to speak at schools and conferences, sharing their story and their philosophy of education. They became advocates for adult education programs and literacy initiatives, using their platform to help others access the opportunities that had transformed their lives. Caroline, now in her 70s and still running the ranch with fierce competence, often joked that the Zimmermans had become more famous than the Z Bar itself. "I give you a teaching job and you turn into celebrities," she would say with fond exasperation. "I should have charged you higher rent." But she was proud of them, proud of what they had built, and how they had used their success to help others. The ranch school that Penelope had started with 8 students now served over 50 children, with 3 full-time teachers and a building that had been expanded twice. Many of the former students had gone on to college or successful careers, and they credited the Zimmermans with giving them the foundation they needed to succeed. In 1920, Arizona became the 48th state, and the Wild West that Isaac and Penelope had known in their youth was officially gone, replaced by the modern world. But the values they had championed, education, opportunity, respect, and love, remained as relevant as ever. On a warm evening in May of 1921, Isaac and Penelope sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. They were both 62 now, with silver hair and hands marked by years of work, but they still held hands as they sat together, still found comfort in each other's presence. "You remember that day at the stage depot?" Penelope asked, a question she had asked many times over the years but never tired of hearing answered. "Every single detail," Isaac replied, squeezing her hand. "I remember thinking you looked lost and angry and so beautiful it hurt to look at you. I remember deciding to take a chance and talk to you, even though I had no idea what to say. I remember you agreeing to come to the ranch and feeling like I had just won the greatest prize in the world even though you were only coming to teach. I remember thinking you were the first man who ever looked at me and saw something valuable rather than something inconvenient," Penelope said. "I remember that first evening when you asked me to teach you everything I knew, and I realized that you truly meant it. You wanted to learn, not because it would make you superior to anyone else, but because you loved knowledge for its own sake. That was when I started falling in love with you, though I did not recognize it yet." "When did you recognize it?" "The night you quoted Keats and threw down your pencil in frustration. The night you took my hand and asked me to court you. I knew in that moment that I had found something rare and precious, a man who saw me as an equal partner. Someone who would grow alongside me, rather than expecting me to diminish myself to fit into his life." Isaac lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, just as he had done that first night so many years ago. "You are still the smartest person I know. You are still the best teacher I have ever had. And you are still the love of my life, Penelope Zimmerman. Every day with you has been a gift." "Every day with you has been an adventure," Penelope replied. "We have built something beautiful, Isaac. Not just our family, though our children make me proud beyond measure. But we have built a legacy of learning and love that will continue long after we are gone. Students we taught are teaching their own children now. People we helped learn to read are passing that gift on to others. We changed lives, Isaac. We made a difference. We did it together, just like we do everything." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds and chosen to build a life based on mutual respect, shared passion for learning, and deep, abiding love. The Wild West had changed around them, but their commitment to each other had remained constant. In 1925, Isaac and Penelope celebrated their 41st wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. James had 3 children, and was a respected professor at a university in California. Margaret had 2 children and a distinguished career as a research chemist, breaking barriers for women in science. Thomas had married a teacher he met at college, and together they ran a school in Phoenix while also maintaining a small ranch, combining both his loves just as he had always planned. The family gathered at the Z-Bar Ranch, which was now run by Caroline's nephew after her peaceful death the previous year at age 79. The new owners maintained the ranch's commitment to education and community, honoring the legacy that Caroline, Isaac, and Penelope had built together. During the celebration, Thomas stood to make a toast. Most people know the story of how my parents met the mail-order bride rejected for being too educated, and the cowboy who asked her to teach him everything she knew. It has become almost a legend, told and retold until it seems like a fairy tale. But growing up as their son, I can tell you that the real story is even better than the legend. Because what they built was not just a romance, though they are deeply in love even now. What they built was a partnership based on genuine respect and admiration, where both people encouraged the other to become the best version of themselves. They showed us that education matters, that love means celebrating your partner's strengths rather than fearing them, and that 2 people working together can change not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. To my parents, may we all be lucky enough to find what you found in each other. The gathering erupted in applause and cheers, and Isaac pulled Penelope close, kissing her temple while their family celebrated around them. "We did all right, didn't we?" he whispered. "We did better than all right," Penelope replied. "We did magnificently." As the years continued to pass, Isaac and Penelope gradually slowed down, as all people must. They stopped teaching regularly, though they still tutored students who sought them out and gave occasional lectures. They spent more time on their porch, reading together and discussing the books they loved, still learning from each other after all these years. In 1932, Isaac's health began to fail. He was 73, and the hard years of ranch work combined with the relentless Arizona sun had taken their toll. Penelope nursed him with the same dedication she brought to everything, and their children came home as often as they could to help and to spend time with their father. On a quiet morning in October, with the autumn sun streaming through the bedroom window and Penelope holding his hand, Isaac spoke his final words. "Thank you for teaching me everything. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for making my life more than I ever dreamed it could be." "Thank you for asking me to teach you," Penelope replied, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for seeing who I really was. Thank you for giving me a home and a family and a love that sustained me through everything. I will carry you in my heart forever, Isaac Zimmerman. You made me whole." Isaac smiled, squeezed her hand weakly, and closed his eyes for the last time. He died peacefully, surrounded by the family he and Penelope had created and the legacy of learning and love that would outlive them both. Penelope lived another 8 years after Isaac's death, remaining sharp and engaged until the end. She continued to read voraciously, maintained correspondence with former students across the country, and wrote a memoir of her own about her years teaching in the Arizona Territory. The book was published in 1939 and became required reading in teachers' colleges across the Southwest. She passed away in her sleep in March of 1940, at the age of 79, in the house that she and Isaac had built together. Her children found her in her favorite chair, a book open on her lap and a peaceful expression on her face, as if she had simply read her way into the next adventure. Isaac and Penelope were buried together on a hillside overlooking the Z-Bar Ranch, with headstones that read simply, "Isaac Zimmerman, 1858–1932, student and teacher, and Penelope Nash Zimmerman, 1860–1940, teacher and beloved. Between the two headstones, their children planted a tree, a cottonwood that grew strong and tall, its roots intertwining beneath the ground just as their parents' lives had intertwined all those years ago. The legacy of the cowboy and the mail-order bride lived on through their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and through the hundreds of students whose lives they had touched. The ranch school they had built continued to operate for another 50 years, and the principles they had championed, that education was a right, not a privilege, that intelligence came in many forms, and that true partnership required mutual respect and admiration, influenced education policy throughout Arizona and beyond. Years later, when people told the story of Isaac and Penelope Zimmerman, they focused on the romance of their meeting, the drama of the mail-order bride rejected for being too educated. But those who truly understood their legacy knew that the real story was not about the beginning, but about everything that came after. It was about two people who chose to build something beautiful together, who valued each other's strengths and supported each other's growth, and who proved that the best kind of love was the kind that made both people better than they could have been alone. In the end, Isaac had learned everything Penelope could teach him and more, becoming an educated man who changed lives with his words and ideas. And Penelope had learned that being too educated was impossible when you found the right partner, someone who celebrated your intelligence rather than fearing it, someone who asked you to teach them everything you knew, and then built on that knowledge to create something entirely their own. Together, they had transformed a chance meeting at a stage depot into a love story that spanned decades, raised a family, built a community, and changed countless lives. They had proven that in the Wild West, where survival often depended on strength and practical skills, there was also room for books and learning and intellectual partnership. They had shown that education and love were not opposing forces, but complementary ones, each making the other stronger and more meaningful. And in doing so, Isaac and Penelope Zimmerman created a legacy that would be remembered long after the Wild West itself had faded into history, a legacy of learning, love, and the transformative power of two people who truly saw and valued each other for exactly who they were.